He offered her a forged contract to assess her honesty. Her quiet correction exposed his entire setup. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. In the heart of Manhattan's bustling downtown, nestled among towering skyscrapers and luxury boutiques, stood an exclusive restaurant known only to the city's elite. The waitstaff, though trained to perfection, were accustomed to the quiet demands of billionaires, CEOs, and high-profile socialites. Among them was Sarah, a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 20s. She had moved to the city a few years ago, hoping to start fresh, but life had not been kind. After years of working low-paying jobs, she found herself as a waitress at one of the city's finest establishments. Her life was nothing extraordinary, but there was something unique about her, a quiet intelligence hidden behind her soft-spoken demeanor. On this particular evening, Sarah was assigned to serve Mr. John Whitmore, a renowned CEO of a global tech company. Whitmore was known for his sharp business acumen and ruthless approach to negotiation. He was the kind of man who tested everyone around him, looking for weaknesses to exploit, whether in business deals or in people's personal integrity. Sarah had heard whispers of his behavior from her colleagues, but she had never encountered him personally. That evening, she greeted him with a polite smile and a menu. He barely acknowledged her presence, eyes glued to his phone. "I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, and a glass of your finest red," he said, barely looking up. Sarah nodded, taking the order without a word. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a cold, calculating look, as if he were sizing her up. Sarah brushed it off, not thinking much of it. But when she returned with his meal, she noticed a thick envelope on the table, tucked beside his plate. Mr. Whitmore gestured for her to come closer, his expression unreadable. "I have a proposition. For you," he said, his voice low and controlled. Sarah stepped forward, uncertain of what he meant. He slid the envelope across the table toward her. "Take a look at this. If you're honest enough to handle this, I'll make sure your life changes forever." Sarah felt a wave of unease wash over her. She opened the envelope, finding a contract inside. But it wasn't just any contract. It was full of vague terms, convoluted clauses, and a ridiculous payout for someone in her position. It was a fake, a test, a way for him to see if she would dare sign something so obviously flawed. As she read through the document, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her, waiting for her to make a decision. But she didn't rush. Sarah took a deep breath and, instead of signing it, quietly corrected the terms in a way that made the contract look legitimate. She pointed out the flaws, the contradictions, and the hidden clauses that no one would have noticed. Whitmore's expression froze. He was stunned. "You've been watching me," he said, his voice colder than before. "You figured it out. Just like that." Sarah nodded, calmly placing the contract back on the table. "You can't expect honesty from people when you test them with lies." The CEO's eyes narrowed. He had not expected this. He had underestimated her. And for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't anticipated: respect. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Whitmore broke the silence. "I've made a lot of enemies over the years, Sarah, but I've never met anyone who would see through a setup so easily. You're not like the others." He paused, as if reconsidering everything. "What if I told you I could offer you a job? One that's more than just serving meals. A position where you could truly make a difference." Sarah stood there for a moment, considering his offer. But deep down, she knew she couldn't be bought. Not like this. She had seen through his game. He had tried to manipulate her, but in the end, it was his own setup that had been exposed. "I'm good where I am," she replied quietly, turning to leave. But before she did, she looked back at him. "Don't forget, Mr. Whitmore, true integrity doesn't need a test to prove it." With that, she walked away, leaving the CEO in his silent shock. In that one moment, Sarah had not only saved herself, but she had also reminded him of a lesson he would never forget. Sarah walked back to the kitchen with a calm step, her mind still processing the events that had just unfolded. It wasn't just another night in the restaurant anymore. The conversation with Mr. Whitmore had left an unexpected mark on her. She had always believed in hard work, that doing her best at whatever she did would eventually lead to success. But now, she realized, she had just proven that intelligence and integrity could matter just as much, if not more, than working tirelessly for every penny. She shook her head slightly, trying to clear her thoughts as she moved through the bustling kitchen. The usual chatter of orders being shouted, pans clanging, and the smell of sizzling steaks filled the air. But today, it all felt distant. Sarah had never imagined that one moment of standing up for herself could change so much. Back in the front of the restaurant, Mr. Whitmore's table remained empty. Her colleagues continued to gossip about the CEO who had just left, clearly stunned by her quiet confidence. It was a small victory, but one that felt big for someone like her, who had always been in the background, always playing the part of the unnoticed waitress. As the evening wore on, she tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that encounter. What had he meant by that offer? Was it real? Was it another test? Or did he truly see something in her? Sarah pushed the thoughts aside. She didn't have time to entertain them. Her shift wasn't over, and there were still plenty of customers to attend to. Yet, the feeling of uncertainty lingered. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah continued working her shifts at the restaurant, but she could feel the shift in how people looked at her. It wasn't just her coworkers, either. She started noticing it from the customers. They treated her with more respect, almost as if they could sense the quiet strength she now carried. It was subtle, but there. A shift in the air. But none of that compared to the day Mr. Whitmore showed up again. It had been a week since their first interaction, and Sarah had tried to put it out of her mind. It was just one of those moments in life that would pass, she told herself. But as she walked into the dining area that morning, there he was, sitting at the same table, looking as composed as ever. He was waiting for her. His gaze met hers the moment she entered the room. This time, there was no test, no game, just a simple, almost curious look. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted her as she approached his table. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, keeping her tone professional, though she felt a wave of nervousness she hadn't expected. "Just water for now," he said, his tone calm. He paused, as if deciding whether to say something more, and then added, "I think we need to talk." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. Not after what had happened the last time. "What about?" she asked, though she knew the answer wasn't going to be as simple as her question. "I've been thinking a lot about that night. About what you said. About what you did," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice thoughtful. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. He hadn't mentioned the contract or the offer he made in their last conversation. "I've never met anyone like you," he continued. "You've made me rethink a lot of things. And I want to offer you a chance." She blinked, unsure of how to react. "A chance?" she repeated, unsure of what he meant. He nodded, his expression serious. "I've been watching you. I know you're smarter than most of the people I work with. I need someone who can think like you do. I want to offer you a position, something more than this." He motioned around the restaurant. Sarah felt the weight of his words. "A position?" she asked, her mind racing. "Doing what exactly?" "You have skills that go beyond waitressing." "I can see that," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I don't know what you've been through to get here, but I know you have potential. More potential than you realize. I want you to help me with something. With my company." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. Sarah swallowed, trying to process everything. The offer was tempting. More money, more respect. A chance to prove herself in a way she never thought possible. But there was something in her that hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. "Why me?" she asked. "Why not someone from your own world? Someone who's already in your circle?" "Because I believe you're different," he said simply. "You don't just see things. You understand them. And I need someone who understands the world in a way that isn't tainted by power or wealth. Someone who can think beyond the numbers, beyond the business deals." She sat there, feeling the weight of his words. She had always dreamed of a different life, a life that wasn't confined to the back of a restaurant. But this, it felt like too much too soon. "I don't know," she said quietly, shaking her head. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for something like that. I'm not even sure I can trust you." "You don't have to decide now," he said, his voice calm. "Take your time. But know this, I don't make offers like this to just anyone. And I don't back down once I've decided I want something." Sarah looked at him, unsure of what to think. She could feel the pressure mounting, but deep down, She knew she had just been given the opportunity of a lifetime. The only question was whether she was ready to take it. Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at the business card Mr. Whitmore had given her. The gold lettering on the back shimmered under the soft light, a stark contrast to the dim surroundings. She hadn't expected him to follow through with his offer. After all, it was one thing to make an offer in a moment of shock, but another to see it through. But there it was, the possibility of a completely different life. She could walk away from the restaurant, from the life she had known for years, and step into a world where her intelligence and integrity were recognized for what they truly were. But the question still lingered in her mind. Was she ready for this? Was it worth the risk? For the next few days, Sarah kept busy at work, burying herself in the routines of serving tables and memorizing orders. But as the hours passed, her mind kept returning to the offer. She couldn't deny the allure of it. The idea of doing something more, something meaningful. The chance to prove herself in a world that had never seen her for who she truly was. Yet, doubt gnawed at her. Trusting Mr. Whitmore was not easy. She had seen the way he operated. Calculating, often ruthless, always looking for an advantage. What if this was all just a game to him? What if she was nothing more than a pawn in his high-stakes world? Sarah wasn't naive, but she wasn't blind either. She knew that wealth and power often came with strings attached. After all, people didn't get to where Mr. Whitmore was by being kind-hearted and trusting. As she entered the restaurant the next morning, she tried to push the thoughts aside. But there he was again, Mr. Whitmore, sitting in his usual corner, his posture impeccable, his eyes scanning the room as if he were evaluating every detail. He looked up when he saw her approach. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, his voice calm, measured. "I trust you've had time to think about my offer." Sarah stopped in front of him, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She had been dreading this moment, but now that it was here, she knew it was time to make a decision. "I've thought about it," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm still not sure if I can trust you." He leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Fair enough, but I think you're making a mistake. You've seen what I can offer you. The question is, what can you offer me in return?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I can offer you my skills, my knowledge. But I won't compromise my values. I won't play games, and I won't be manipulated." Mr. Whitmore's smile widened slightly. "I respect that. But understand, this world, my world, it doesn't play by the same rules you're used to." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not looking to change the rules. I'm just looking for a chance to prove that someone like me, someone who's never had the luxury of power or influence, can make a difference." There was a long pause as he studied her, as if weighing her words. Finally, he nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll give you the chance," he said, his voice low. "But be warned, Sarah, this won't be easy. You'll have to be willing to push yourself in ways you never imagined. And you'll have to prove yourself every step of the way." Sarah's heart raced as she considered his words. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for, but it came with a price. Was she ready to pay it? "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. "I'll take the chance." Mr. Whitmore stood up, extending his hand across the table. "Then welcome to the team." She took his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. This was no longer just about proving herself. It was about taking control of her future, about stepping into a world where she could make her own mark. But as she shook his hand, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Was she really ready for the life she had just entered? The life where every move, every decision, would be watched closely and judged. The life where nothing came easy. But there was no turning back now. Sarah had made her choice, and she would face whatever came next with the same quiet confidence that had gotten her this far. Sarah arrived at the sleek, glass-walled office building for her first day at Anderson Capital, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The elevators were immaculate, the walls adorned with expensive artwork that screamed success and wealth. She had worked in high-end restaurants, but nothing could have prepared her for the corporate world she was about to enter. As the elevator doors opened to the 87th floor, she stepped into a world that felt alien. Everything was pristine, polished, and efficient. The cold, calculated hum of the office environment hit her like a wall. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone who had been chosen for her intelligence, her insight. But as she walked through the hallways, every step seemed heavier than the last. She was out of her depth, unsure of what exactly she had signed up for. When she reached Mr. Whitmore's office, she took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," came his voice from behind the door. She stepped inside and found him standing by the large floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city below. He turned when he heard the door, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was a slight flicker of recognition, like he was seeing her for the first time as more than just the woman who had corrected his contract. He gave her a small smile. "Sarah, I'm glad you're here." He motioned toward the chair across from his desk. "Please, have a seat." She sat down, her hands resting nervously in her lap. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Whitmore," she said, keeping her voice steady, though inside, she felt as if she was about to crumble. "I'm here to do my best." Mr. Whitmore nodded and took a seat behind his desk. "I have no doubt that you'll do great. But I need you to understand that this is not going to be easy. The world we're about to dive into is ruthless. You'll have to be ready for anything." His gaze softened just a fraction. "But I believe you're capable." She nodded, her pulse quickening. He pulled a folder from his desk and slid it across to her. "I've assigned you to a special project. We're looking into a potential merger, but there are risks. Financial risks, legal risks. I need you to review these documents and give me your analysis." She opened the folder and saw pages upon pages of complex financial statements, legal agreements, and investment terms. This wasn't the kind of work she had imagined when she accepted his offer, but it was exactly what she had been trained for all those years ago. The legal documents, the analysis, the strategies. She had spent so much time suppressing her skills, working in low-paying jobs to survive. Now, here she was, back in her element. "I'll get started immediately," she said, already scanning the first page. "I'll need access to the financial systems and legal advisors to ensure everything checks out." "Of course," Mr. Whitmore replied. "I'll have my team set that up for you. But I want you to remember, Sarah, this isn't just about numbers. It's about the bigger picture. It's about understanding people, understanding their motivations, knowing who you can trust and who you can't." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I'm not just testing your knowledge of the law and finance. I'm testing your ability to navigate the power dynamics of this world." She felt a slight tension in her shoulders, but she didn't let it show. She had always been good at reading people. She had learned that from years of serving people in the restaurant industry. She knew when to smile, when to listen, and when to speak up. Mr. Whitmore's gaze remained on her, as if he were trying to figure her out. "You're not what I expected, Sarah," he said after a long pause. "You've been through more than I thought. But that's why I chose you. You have a depth that people here don't have. People like you, who aren't caught up in the games we play, are the ones who can make a real difference." His words felt almost too heavy to bear. She had always seen herself as someone who was just trying to survive. But now, it seemed that survival wasn't enough. She needed to be more. She needed to be part of something bigger, something that mattered. As the day wore on, Sarah threw herself into her work, analyzing documents, making phone calls, and meeting with different departments. She was impressed by how smoothly everything operated, yet she couldn't help but notice the undercurrent of tension. People in the office were always looking over their shoulders, as if waiting for someone to make a wrong move. But for Sarah, there was something oddly liberating about it. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was an equal in this high-stakes world, and that was a feeling she hadn't experienced before. The days passed quickly, and Sarah found herself settling into her new role. She was starting to understand the intricacies of corporate finance, the power plays, and the subtle maneuvers that could make or break a deal. Mr. Whitmore had been right about one thing. This world was brutal, but it also offered a chance to prove herself in ways she never thought possible. It wasn't just about money. It was about power, the kind of power that could change lives. She knew she had to be careful. People in this world didn't always play fair, and trust could be a dangerous thing. But Sarah was no longer the person she had been when she walked into the restaurant. She was learning to navigate this new world with the same quiet strength that had served her all her life. And as she sat in her new office, reviewing the final reports on the merger, she realized one thing. This was only the beginning. The days since Sarah had joined Anderson Capital blurred together, her life transforming in ways she could never have anticipated. She spent countless hours in meetings, reviewing documents, and learning the intricacies of high-level business negotiations. The tasks Mr. Whitmore had set before her were more than just challenging. They were a test of everything she had ever learned and everything she had yet to understand. But Sarah thrived under pressure. It was in her nature to push through, to keep moving forward even when the path ahead seemed unclear. The office, once intimidating, was starting to feel like her new home. As the weeks passed, she found herself growing more comfortable with the world of finance and corporate strategy, and her relationship with Mr. Whitmore became more than just a boss-employee dynamic. She was learning that beneath his cold exterior, there was a man who valued sharp minds and unyielding determination. But as much as she admired his intellect, Sarah couldn't help but feel that there was more to his world than he was letting on. One evening, after another long day of analysis and strategy sessions, Sarah found herself in a meeting with Whitmore. This one was different. There was a sense of urgency in his demeanor, an unspoken tension that hung in the air as he sat across from her at the conference table. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but with an edge of seriousness she hadn't heard before. "I need your help with something. There's a deal on the table, but it's more complicated than I originally thought. I'm counting on you to help me see the truth." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued but wary. "What kind of deal are we talking about?" Whitmore's eyes flickered toward the stack of documents in front of him. "A merger. But not just any merger. This involves a company that's been hiding key financial information, and I need someone who can see past the numbers, someone who isn't blinded by the potential profits." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was what she had trained for. She could feel the weight of the responsibility settle over her, but it didn't scare her. It excited her. "I'll look into it," she replied, her voice calm, despite the excitement building within her. Whitmore nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "I knew you were the right person for this." Over the next several days, Sarah threw herself into the project, combing through every financial report, every legal document, and every email correspondence she could find. She worked late into the night, her mind sharp and focused as she pieced together the puzzle before her. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered. The company in question, though initially impressive on paper, had been hiding significant losses and had made questionable financial decisions that could threaten the entire merger. But it wasn't just the numbers that troubled her. There was something in the way the executives had communicated internally, a sense of desperation that wasn't reflected in their public-facing documents. The more she learned, the more she realized that this wasn't just a deal gone wrong. It was a trap, and the stakes were much higher than anyone had anticipated. As she put the final pieces together, Sarah called Whitmore into her office to present her findings. He walked in, his usual confident stride tempered by the gravity of the situation. "I found something," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "This merger isn't what it seems. The company has been hiding financial discrepancies, and if we move forward, we risk losing millions." Whitmore's expression hardened as he listened, his eyes narrowing with the intensity of someone who had spent years in this business. "What kind of discrepancies?" Sarah detailed the findings, outlining the hidden debts, the inflated projections, and the false financial reports that had been manipulated to make the company appear more profitable than it truly was. As she spoke, Whitmore listened carefully, his face a mask of concentration. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice low. "There's no mistake?" Sarah nodded. "I'm sure. The numbers don't add up, and the internal communications show clear signs of intentional manipulation." There was a long pause as Whitmore processed the information. Then, without warning, he slammed his hand on the table. "I knew it. I knew something wasn't right." He stood up, pacing in the small office, his mind racing as he considered the next steps. "We can't let this go through. If we do, we'll be signing our own death sentence. It's not just about money, Sarah. This could destroy everything we've worked for." Sarah remained silent, watching him with a mix of respect and caution. Whitmore's next words shocked her. "I want you to handle this. Go to the board, expose the truth, and make sure this merger never happens." Sarah's eyes widened, the weight of the request settling on her shoulders. "Are you sure? This could cost us more than just money. It could ruin relationships, burn bridges." Whitmore looked at her, his expression hardening with a rare intensity. "Sometimes, the right thing to do is the hardest thing. We can't let our pride and greed blind us to the truth. You're the only one I trust to handle this. Can you do it?" She stood, meeting his gaze. "I can do it." As she walked out of the office, Sarah knew this was the moment that would define her future. The world of power, Money and ruthless deals was no longer just something she observed from the sidelines. She was in the game now, and she would play it by her own rules. Sarah stood in front of the large boardroom table, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with some of the most powerful people in the company: executives, stakeholders, legal advisors, all of them staring at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Mr. Whitmore had given her the task of exposing the truth behind the potential merger, a task that had become more complicated with every document she reviewed, every conversation she overheard. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on her, but she couldn't back out now, not after everything she had worked for. She looked around the room, her eyes meeting those of the men and women seated at the table. They were all waiting for her to speak, but she was uncertain of where to start. Finally, she took a deep breath and stood tall. "Thank you for your time," she began, her voice steady but laced with the tension she felt. "I'm here today to present the findings regarding the merger with Greystone Technologies." She paused, letting her words sink in. "After reviewing the financials, the legal agreements, and conducting a thorough investigation, I have come to a conclusion that none of us were expecting. This merger is based on false information. The financial records have been manipulated, key details have been omitted, and there are discrepancies in the valuation that cannot be ignored." She could feel the room shift, the tension rising as the executives exchanged glances. Some seemed surprised, others skeptical, but none of them seemed willing to speak up yet. Sarah continued. "The company we're looking to merge with is not in a strong position. It has been hiding significant debt and making risky financial moves that could threaten the entire deal. The projected profits are inflated, and the numbers do not add up. This merger, if it goes through, could result in major losses for Anderson Capital." She slid the first set of documents across the table to the board. "Here are the discrepancies I found in their quarterly reports. You'll see that their revenue projections don't match their actual earnings, and there's evidence that their financial team has been altering the numbers to make the company appear more stable than it really is." Sarah watched as the room grew silent. She had expected resistance, but the faces in front of her were unreadable. Her mind raced as she prepared for the next step. "I have also reviewed internal communications from Greystone's leadership, and it's clear that they've been aware of these issues for months, but chose not to disclose them. They've been hiding the truth, and we are on the verge of making a multi-million-dollar mistake if we proceed." One of the senior executives, a man in his 50s with a cold, calculating stare, leaned forward. "So, what you're telling us is that we've been misled, that the deal we've been working on for the last 6 months is based on lies?" Sarah nodded, keeping her composure. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." The room erupted into murmurs as everyone began talking at once. The noise was overwhelming, but Sarah remained focused, keeping her gaze locked on Whitmore. He had remained silent throughout her presentation, his face as unreadable as ever. She wasn't sure what he thought of her findings, but she had done her part. She had brought the truth to light. Finally, Whitmore spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Sarah has done the work, and her findings are undeniable," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "We cannot ignore what she's uncovered. If we go through with this merger, we risk not just financial loss, but our reputation. We cannot afford to be seen as a company that makes decisions based on faulty information." The room fell silent again. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of every person at the table on her. She had exposed the truth, but now it was up to them to decide what to do with it. "So, what's the next step?" asked another board member, his tone filled with frustration. "Do we pull out of the deal? What happens to the partnership?" Whitmore looked around the room, his expression hardening. "We need to investigate further, and we need to do it quickly. We'll halt any further negotiations with Greystone until we've had a chance to review everything in more detail." Sarah's heart sank slightly. She knew the consequences of this decision. If the merger was called off, it would mean weeks, maybe months, of work down the drain. "What about the fallout?" she asked. "What will this mean for the company?" Whitmore turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It means we take control of the situation now, before it spirals out of control. And it means we act with integrity. The truth may cost us, Sarah, but in the long run, it will save us." Sarah nodded, trying to digest his words. She had always been taught to do the right thing, even when it was hard. But this was different. This wasn't just about making the right choice. It was about protecting everything she had worked for, everything she had built. As the meeting ended, Sarah walked out of the boardroom, her mind racing with the weight of what had just happened. She had exposed the truth, but now the future was uncertain. The path forward would be difficult, but Sarah knew that she had made the right decision. She had chosen integrity over profit, and that would define her, no matter the outcome. The days following the board meeting were tense, filled with long hours of investigation and uncertainty. Sarah threw herself into her work, sifting through more data, digging deeper into Greystone's operations, and meeting with legal teams to ensure that every angle was covered. Whitmore had given her the responsibility to lead the investigation, a task she had never imagined she would undertake. But with every passing day, Sarah felt the weight of the decision she had made. The company was on the edge. She could feel it in the air, thick with the tension of what was to come. As the hours turned into days, Sarah began to question whether she had done the right thing. She had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? The merger was on the brink of collapse, and with it, Anderson Capital's reputation. Whitmore had assured her that they were doing the right thing, but Sarah wasn't so sure. She had never been part of something so big, so life-altering. Every decision she made now seemed to ripple out, affecting not just her future, but the future of the company. Late one evening, as Sarah was reviewing yet another set of financial statements, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Whitmore. "Meet me in my office. I need to discuss something important." Her stomach tightened. She had expected this. Whitmore had been distant lately, as if he were weighing the consequences of her findings, of the truth she had exposed. When she arrived at his office, she found him standing by the large windows, staring out at the city below. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to see me?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Whitmore nodded, his gaze shifting to the papers on his desk. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone heavier than usual. "This situation isn't just about the merger anymore. It's about the bigger picture. The future of Anderson Capital, our strategy, and the integrity of everything we've built." Sarah waited for him to continue, her mind racing with possibilities. "I think it's time we make a move," he said, finally turning to face her. "We've exposed the issues with Greystone, but there's more to this than just stopping a merger. We need to take control of the situation and turn it to our advantage. I want you to help me with something, Sarah." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. She had expected a call to action, but this was different. "What do you mean?" she asked, a hint of caution in her voice. Whitmore leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her uneasy. "I want us to acquire Greystone. We've already exposed their flaws. Now, we take advantage of the situation. We buy them out, restructure their operations, and make them part of Anderson Capital. With the right leadership, we can turn them into something valuable." Sarah's heart raced. This wasn't just about stopping the merger anymore. It was about turning a crisis into an opportunity. But was she ready to take on something this big, this risky? She had spent so long being the quiet observer, the person in the background, never at the center of the action. Now, she was being asked to step into the spotlight, to make a decision that could change everything. "I don't know," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "This feels risky. What if we're wrong? What if it all falls apart?" Whitmore stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, you've already proven you have the intelligence and the insight to navigate this. You've exposed the truth. Now, we need someone who can think outside the box, someone who can take what others see as a failure and turn it into a success. That's why I'm trusting you with this." She felt his words settle over her, heavy with expectation. It was as if he had placed her future and the future of Anderson Capital in her hands. "I can't promise you that everything will work out," Whitmore continued. "But I can promise you this. You will have the power to shape this deal. And in the end, you'll know you did the right thing." Sarah stood there, torn between the safety of what she knew and the uncertain promise of something bigger, something that could change her life forever. She thought back to the moment when she had first corrected that forged contract, when she had stood up for what was right, even when it meant going against someone with so much more power than her. This was the same. A choice. A chance to prove that she could be more than just a bystander in the world of business. "Okay," she said, her voice steady, but with a new resolve. "I'll do it. Let's acquire Greystone." Whitmore's expression softened, a small, approving smile crossing his face. I knew I made the right choice. Let's get to work. As Sarah left his office, she couldn't help but feel the gravity of the decision she had just made. She was no longer just a waitress turned analyst. She was part of the game now, and she was going to play it by her own rules. The weeks following Sarah's decision to take on the Greystone acquisition were a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings, tense negotiations, and long nights spent poring over contracts and financial statements. She had become a key player in Anderson Capital's future, and the weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders every day. Whitmore had given her the power to make decisions, but with that power came constant pressure. She had never been more exhausted in her life, but she also hadn't felt more alive. The work was challenging, demanding, and often unpredictable, but she thrived in the chaos. Yet, as the deal moved forward, Sarah couldn't ignore the whispers in the halls of Anderson Capital. People were starting to talk about her. At first, it was subtle, furtive glances, hushed conversations. But as her influence grew, so did the gossip. Some admired her for her intelligence, her ability to navigate the complexities of the deal with grace and precision. Others, however, questioned her rise. She's only here because Whitmore trusts her, one executive muttered during a meeting. But can she handle the power? Sarah heard it all, but she refused to let it affect her. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to get to this point, and she wasn't about to let anyone undermine her. But it wasn't just the office politics that kept her up at night. There was still the question of Greystone itself. As Sarah delved deeper into their operations, she uncovered more unsettling truths. The financial discrepancies she had initially discovered were only the tip of the iceberg. Greystone's leadership was more entrenched in deception than she had realized. Internal emails revealed collusion, falsified documents, and even illegal business practices. Sarah knew she couldn't let the deal go through as planned. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that acquiring Greystone would mean inheriting a mess that could destroy Anderson Capital if mishandled. Yet, as the stakes grew higher, so did the pressure from Whitmore. He trusted Sarah, and he believed that the acquisition was the key to Anderson Capital's continued dominance in the market. "You're doing great, Sarah," Whitmore had told her during one of their late-night meetings. "This is exactly what we need. The company is ours for the taking. You're the one who will make it happen." His confidence in her was both a blessing and a burden. She wanted to prove him right, but she also knew the truth. If she didn't handle this deal carefully, it would be disastrous. After days of back-and-forth negotiations, Sarah finally called a meeting with Whitmore. The time had come to make a decision. "We can't move forward with this," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil. Inside her, Greystone's leadership is corrupt. They've been hiding so much more than we thought. If we acquire them, we'll be taking on a liability that could cost us millions, maybe even billions. Whitmore looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Sarah thought he would push back, argue with her, but instead, he remained silent. Finally, he spoke. "So what do you suggest we do?" She met his gaze, feeling the weight of the moment. "We back out of the deal. It's the only way to protect Anderson Capital. If we move forward, we risk everything." Whitmore didn't respond immediately. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. Sarah held her breath, waiting for his decision. After what felt like an eternity, he turned back to her. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's too risky. I trust your judgment, Sarah. If you think we should walk away, then we'll walk away." His words hit her harder than she expected. Whitmore had always been a man who valued power, control, and dominance. But here he was, conceding to her judgment. It was a sign of respect, but it also felt like a moment of vulnerability. She had never seen him like this before, so unsure, so willing to take a step back. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for the trust he had placed in her, but it was quickly replaced by the weight of what came next. Walking away from the deal would mean publicly admitting that they had been wrong. It would be a major blow to Anderson Capital's reputation, but it was the right choice. She was sure of it. Over the next few days, Sarah worked with the legal team to prepare a formal announcement. It wasn't easy. The pressure from the board to salvage the deal was immense, and there were whispers of disappointment and frustration. But Sarah remained resolute. She knew they were doing the right thing, even if it wasn't the easiest thing. When the day came to announce the decision, Sarah stood in the boardroom once more, this time with Whitmore by her side. He gave her a nod, a silent acknowledgement that she had done the right thing. As the room filled with murmurs of surprise and confusion, Sarah took a deep breath and spoke. After careful consideration, we have decided to withdraw from the Greystone merger, she said, her voice clear and confident. While the deal held significant potential, the risks associated with it outweigh the benefits. Anderson Capital will continue to focus on opportunities that align with our values and long-term vision. The room was silent for a moment before the question started. Are you sure this is the right decision? One board member asked. What does this mean for our future? Another voice chimed in. Sarah met their gazes, unwavering. It means that Anderson Capital will continue to thrive by staying true to its values. We will not compromise our integrity for short-term gains. And that is what will set us apart in the long run. The room fell silent again, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt the weight of the moment lift. She had made the right choice, and she had done it on her own terms. After the announcement to pull out of the Greystone merger, Sarah had expected a certain amount of fallout, but the reality of the situation hit her harder than she had anticipated. It wasn't just the board that was questioning her decision. Employees within Anderson Capital had begun to voice their concerns. Whispers in the hallways grew louder, and it was clear that not everyone agreed with the choice she had made. Some saw it as a moment of strength, a stand for integrity, but others viewed it as a failure, a missed opportunity that could have led to significant profit and expansion. As Sarah sat in her office, reviewing more contracts, the weight of leadership started to feel heavier. Whitmore's presence had always been a steadying force for her, but even he seemed distant in the wake of their decision. She hadn't seen him in the days following the announcement. His schedule was packed, and it was clear he was navigating the complex aftermath of the merger fallout. Sarah, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. She had done the right thing. She knew it deep down. But as the pressure mounted, it became harder to convince herself that the storm would pass. It wasn't until a meeting with Whitmore a week later that Sarah began to understand the true consequences of their actions. He called her into his office, his face as serious as she had ever seen it. Sarah, he said, his voice low, we've hit a rough patch. You've made your case, and I respect that. But now we need to focus on rebuilding our reputation. He paused, his fingers tapping on the desk as he looked at her. I trust you, but we can't afford to sit back and wait for this to blow over. We need to take control of the narrative. Sarah nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. The decision had been a good one in terms of integrity, but it had left Anderson Capital exposed, vulnerable to the scrutiny of competitors and the media. They had made enemies in Greystone's boardroom, but they had also made allies. It was time to shift gears and make sure the company's standing in the industry was not jeopardized by the decision. What do you suggest we do? Sarah asked. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he considered his next words carefully. We take our time, he began, and we move forward with caution. But we also have to show the market that we're still a force to be reckoned with. This isn't just about avoiding one bad deal. It's about positioning ourselves for the future. We need to find a new opportunity, something bigger, something that can reestablish our credibility. Sarah felt the fire rekindle within her. She had already proven that she could find the truth when it was buried beneath layers of deceit. Now, it was time to find the opportunity that would set them back on track. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and endless negotiations. Sarah spent hours researching potential mergers and acquisitions, trying to find something that would not only recover their losses, but also prove that Anderson Capital was more than capable of navigating a high-stakes world. But every opportunity she presented to Whitmore seemed to fall short of his expectations. Each time she thought she had found a solid lead, something about it didn't sit right with him. It was frustrating. Her mind constantly raced with ideas, but nothing seemed to hit the mark. And then, just as Sarah was beginning to lose hope, she came across an obscure tech startup in Silicon Valley. The company had potential, real potential. They had developed an innovative technology that was gaining attention in niche markets. They were still small, but they had what could be the next big thing. Sarah reached out to the company's CEO and arranged a meeting, knowing that this might be the break they needed. The meeting was set for the following week, and as Sarah prepared for the pitch, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. She had worked in the restaurant industry for years, watching people make decisions based on their emotions, their instincts. But now, As she sat in her office preparing for a deal that could change the future of Anderson Capital, Sarah realized that she was no longer just reacting to situations. She was creating opportunities, making decisions that had the potential to impact not just her career, but the entire company. The meeting went better than expected. The tech startup CEO was sharp, passionate about his company, and eager to expand. He was looking for a partner who could help take his company to the next level, and Sarah saw the potential for a mutually beneficial partnership. She presented Anderson Capital's vision, laying out the ways they could help grow his business while maintaining its innovative spirit. By the end of the meeting, both sides were on the same page. Sarah could see the excitement in Whitmore's eyes when she briefed him on the potential deal. This was the kind of opportunity they needed. A deal built on mutual respect and innovation, not just the pursuit of profit. Whitmore smiled for the first time in days. "This is it, Sarah. This is what we've been waiting for." Sarah felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just about taking down Greystone. This was about forging a path forward, about finding something real, something that mattered. She had proven herself once again, not just to Whitmore, but to herself. The journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt the weight on her shoulders begin to lift. Anderson Capital was on the path to recovery, and this time, they would do it the right way. The deal with the Silicon Valley tech startup had progressed faster than Sarah had expected. After that initial meeting, negotiations had gone smoothly. Both Anderson Capital and the tech company CEO were aligned on most terms, and within weeks, they had drawn up a preliminary agreement. Sarah had spent countless hours working with the legal teams and Whitmore's advisory board to ensure everything was in place. It wasn't just about the financials. They were building a partnership based on trust and innovation, something that had been lacking in their previous deals. As the final details were being ironed out, Sarah found herself in the position she had always wanted, at the forefront of a major business move. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was the one making decisions, influencing outcomes. Whitmore, though still distant, was clearly pleased with her progress. For the first time in a long while, Sarah began to feel like she truly belonged in the world of high finance, not as a bystander, but as a key player. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, the unexpected happened. The final day of negotiations was scheduled, and just hours before the meeting, Sarah received a phone call. It was from the CEO of the tech company. "Sarah, there's a problem," he said, his voice tense. "I don't know how to explain this, but some of the financial data we gave you, it's not adding up. We've made some mistakes. There are discrepancies in the revenue projections, and the valuations don't align with our latest projections. We might have overstated some things." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was the last thing she expected. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tightening. "We've already agreed on the terms. Are you backing out now?" No, he said quickly. "It's not like that. I'm just trying to be transparent. We've been under pressure, and there are a few things we didn't fully account for. I need your help to get this resolved before the final meeting tomorrow. If you find out that we've misrepresented anything, we'll have to start from scratch. This could fall apart, and I can't afford that." Sarah's mind raced. She had worked too hard, and Anderson Capital had invested too much to let this deal collapse at the last minute. But she also knew that if the discrepancies were true, this could cost them more than money. It could cost them their reputation. She had learned that the hard way. "I'll handle it," Sarah said, her tone firm, masking the panic rising inside her. "Send me the updated data, and I'll go through it myself." After hanging up, Sarah quickly reached out to her team. She had only a few hours to uncover the truth and find a solution. This was the test she had feared. The pressure was on, and there was no turning back. As she worked late into the night, she pored over the updated numbers, comparing them to the initial projections. It wasn't long before she spotted the inconsistencies. Some of the projections were indeed inflated by a significant margin. But the worst part was the way the data had been manipulated to hide the extent of the company's financial instability. Sarah knew this wasn't just a mistake. Someone had intentionally altered the figures to make the company appear more valuable than it was. It wasn't just a financial error, it was deception. Her heart pounded in her chest as she picked up the phone and dialed Whitmore's number. "Mr. Whitmore," she said when he answered, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've got a serious issue. The data we've received from the tech company is compromised. There are discrepancies in their revenue projections, and some of their valuation numbers are completely fabricated. This is more than a simple mistake. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. How bad is it? Whitmore finally asked, his voice low and calculating. It's bad, Sarah said. If we proceed with the deal, we're buying into a company that's not worth what they're telling us. It's not just the numbers. It's the integrity of the entire operation. We need to stop this before it goes any further. Whitmore's response was quick. We're not backing out of this now, Sarah. We've already committed too much to walk away. What I need from you is a solution. Fix this. Get the truth from them. If we have to, we'll negotiate the terms again. But we are not going back to square one. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had no choice but to act. Whitmore had made his decision, but the risk was greater than ever. She had to get to the bottom of this, fast. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the meeting with the tech company's CEO, her mind focused and determined. She knew what she had to do. As they sat down to discuss the final terms of the deal, Sarah spoke up. We have a problem, she said, her voice calm but firm. The financial data you provided isn't accurate. There are discrepancies in your revenue projections and valuations. This isn't a minor issue. The CEO's face drained of color. What are you talking about? He stammered. I told you everything was fine. It's not fine, Sarah replied. We've done our due diligence. The numbers you gave us are fabricated. If you want to continue this deal, we need complete transparency. We're not going forward with any false information. The room fell silent as the CEO realized the gravity of the situation. He knew he had been caught, and now the only choice was to come clean. Okay, he said, his voice shaky. You're right. There were some things we didn't disclose. But I didn't have a choice. I needed the deal, and I thought I could fix it later. Sarah stared at him, her gaze unwavering. That's not how this works. Integrity is everything. You want this deal? Then you need to show us that you're being honest. Whitmore's eyes met hers across the room. Sarah had done it. She had forced the truth into the light, and in doing so, she had protected Anderson Capital once again. But now, the next step was clear. They had to rebuild the trust they had almost lost. The days following the meeting with the tech company CEO felt like a blur for Sarah. The pressure of the negotiations had taken its toll, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had done the right thing. The deal wasn't off the table yet, but the road ahead was still uncertain. She had exposed the discrepancies and forced the truth to surface, but the path to recovery wasn't going to be easy. Anderson Capital was still reeling from the fallout of the Greystone debacle, and now this new development threatened to undermine all their progress. Whitmore had made it clear that they weren't backing out of the deal, but Sarah could sense that the atmosphere within the company had shifted. People were beginning to look at her differently, some with admiration, others with skepticism. As she sat in her office, reviewing the latest financial statements from the tech company, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. She had given everything to protect Anderson Capital's integrity, but she was starting to wonder if it was all worth it. Late one afternoon, as Sarah was wrapping up for the day, she received a call from Whitmore. Sarah, I need you in my office. Now, he said, his tone serious. She didn't hesitate, immediately gathering the documents she had been working on and making her way to his office. When she arrived, Whitmore was standing by the window, staring out at the skyline. There was something about his posture, the way he stood, that made Sarah feel uneasy. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable. I've been thinking, he said, his voice low. You did good with the tech company. You exposed the truth, but we still have a long way to go. I need you to step up again. Sarah raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. What do you mean? She asked. Whitmore turned back to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. There's another deal in the works. Something bigger than anything we've done before. But it's delicate, and I need someone I can trust to handle it. I need you to lead this, Sarah. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been thrust into the middle of Anderson Capital's most important decisions. But this was different. This wasn't just a small acquisition or a risky merger. This was something that could define her career. I don't understand, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. What kind of deal is this? Whitmore looked over his shoulder, his gaze piercing. It's an international deal. A merger with a foreign conglomerate, one with political ties that could shake things up. If we pull this off, we'll secure our place at the top. But it's not going to be easy. There are forces at play that could derail everything. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. This was what she had been waiting for. the chance to prove herself in a way that went beyond mere corporate numbers. But with the stakes so high, she couldn't ignore the risks. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice steady now, more determined. Whitmore turned fully to face her. "I need you to go to their headquarters, meet with their leadership, and negotiate the terms. You'll need to navigate their political landscape, figure out their real intentions, and bring the deal back to us. It's a delicate game, Sarah, but I know you can handle it." She was taken aback. She had never been asked to travel for something like this. International mergers, foreign negotiations, it was all so far beyond what she had expected when she first started. But there was no turning back now. "When do I leave?" she asked, her heart racing. Whitmore gave a small, approving smile. "Tomorrow. You'll have a private jet waiting for you at the airport. I'll have the details of the deal ready before you board." As Sarah made her way back to her office, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and fear. This was her moment. She had fought hard to get here, and now she had the chance to prove herself on the world stage. But she also knew that the stakes were higher than anything she had ever faced. One wrong move, and the deal could implode, destroying everything Anderson Capital had worked for. The next day, Sarah found herself in a luxurious airport terminal, her bags packed, and her mind racing with what lay ahead. She had reviewed the details of the deal for hours, but the real work wouldn't begin until she stepped foot in the company's headquarters. The flight was long, and the further she got from home, the more she realized the weight of the task at hand. This wasn't just about closing a deal. It was about maintaining Anderson Capital's power and influence in a world where trust and alliances were everything. When she arrived at the foreign conglomerate's headquarters, she was met by a team of high-ranking executives. They were cordial, but Sarah could sense the tension in the air. This wasn't just a business negotiation. It was a game of power, and Sarah was going to have to play it better than anyone else in the room. The first meeting was tense, the air thick with unspoken rules. The executives were polite but distant, their eyes constantly assessing her. She kept her calm, answering questions with precision and carefully navigating the political landscape. As the hours passed, Sarah could see the shifts in the room. They were starting to warm to her, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the real challenges began. The more she learned about the foreign conglomerate's plans, the more she realized how complex the deal truly was. There were hidden agendas, alliances, and power struggles at play that she hadn't anticipated. But Sarah wasn't backing down. She had come this far, and now it was time to prove her worth. She would navigate the politics, uncover the hidden truths, and bring this deal back to Anderson Capital, no matter what it took. The days in the foreign headquarters felt like an eternity for Sarah. Every meeting, every discussion, seemed to peel back another layer of complexity in the deal she was trying to negotiate. The executives at the conglomerate were cordial, but their intentions were far from transparent. The real power struggles beneath the surface became more apparent with every passing hour. The first few days were filled with tense exchanges, but Sarah had a way of listening and observing that made the room more comfortable. She knew that to win this deal, she had to do more than just prove her knowledge. She had to show them that she understood the game they were playing. She was no longer just the analyst from Anderson Capital. She was now part of the delicate web of international business, and she had to navigate it with finesse. By the third day, Sarah began to unravel the hidden agendas behind the conglomerate's leadership. There were whispers of power struggles within their ranks, of fractured alliances that threatened to destabilize the entire operation. Sarah knew she had to use this to her advantage. She spent hours in meetings with various department heads, learning more about the inner workings of their company. She could see their weaknesses, and she knew that if she played her cards right, she could turn those weaknesses into leverage. Whitmore had trusted her to negotiate this deal, and now, more than ever, she could feel the weight of that responsibility. But as the days wore on, Sarah began to feel a nagging doubt in the back of her mind. She had uncovered so much, but the more she learned, the more complicated things became. The deal wasn't just about business anymore. It was about politics, personal vendettas, and influence. It was about playing a game where the stakes were higher than anything she had ever imagined. It wasn't long before Sarah realized she wasn't the only one playing this game. A rival company, one with its own political ties, had quietly begun to make moves on the same deal. They were trying to get in the way, undermining her efforts and attempting to position themselves as the preferred partner for the conglomerate. It was a subtle attack, one that came in the form of backdoor negotiations and secret meetings, but Sarah could sense it. The game was getting even more dangerous. One evening, as Sarah was preparing for a final presentation with the conglomerate's executives, she received an unexpected call from Whitmore. His voice was calm but urgent. "Sarah, I've just been informed that there's another company trying to get in on the deal. They're playing dirty, and they're using their political connections to try and force our hand." Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of tension. "It's Harrison Global," Whitmore said, his voice clipped. "They've been circling the deal for weeks, and now they're making their move. We need to act quickly, or they'll take everything we've worked for." The news hit Sarah harder than she expected. Harrison Global was a major player in the industry, with far more influence than Anderson Capital could ever hope to match. If they got involved, it could push her and Whitmore out of the deal completely. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. "What's our next move?" she asked, her mind already racing through the possibilities. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "I trust you, Sarah. You've got this. But we need to act fast. We'll use every advantage we have to outmaneuver them." Sarah knew that the stakes had just been raised. She had to find a way to not only close the deal, but also ensure that Harrison Global didn't sabotage their efforts. The next day, she met with the conglomerate's leadership once again. This time, the room was different. There was an air of tension, a subtle shift in how they viewed her. She had already gained their trust, but now she had to prove that she could protect their interests from the looming threat of Harrison Global. As the meeting progressed, Sarah used everything she had learned over the past few days to her advantage. She subtly sowed seeds of doubt about Harrison Global's intentions, highlighting their tactics and the risks they posed. She played the game with precision, carefully threading her arguments in a way that made the conglomerate's leadership question whether Harrison Global was the right choice. The rival company's attempts to manipulate the situation became apparent, and Sarah made sure to point them out at every turn. By the time the meeting ended, Sarah could see the shift. The executives were no longer just listening to her. They were following her lead. She had turned the tables on Harrison Global, using their own tactics against them. When Sarah returned to her hotel that evening, she felt a sense of satisfaction that she hadn't felt in a long time. The battle wasn't over, but she had won the first round. The next few days were a blur of negotiations, counteroffers, and high-stakes maneuvering. But Sarah remained calm, focused, and determined. She had taken control of the situation and had proven that she could stand up to the pressure. By the end of the week, the deal was sealed. Anderson Capital had secured the merger with the tech company, and they had successfully outmaneuvered Harrison Global. The victory was sweet, but Sarah knew that this was just the beginning. She had come a long way since she was just a waitress, but now she was a force to be reckoned with in the business world. And with Whitmore by her side, there was no limit to what she could accomplish. The deal with the tech company was officially signed, marking a monumental achievement for Sarah and Anderson Capital. The merger, which had seemed uncertain just days earlier, was now a reality. But as the champagne was popped and the celebratory emails flooded in, Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had led her here. She had fought for this deal. She had navigated the treacherous waters of corporate politics, faced down a rival company, and outmaneuvered them with nothing but her intelligence, her integrity, and her refusal to back down. But as the excitement faded, she realized that the journey she had started was far from over. Anderson Capital was now poised to expand in ways they had never imagined. But with that success came even greater challenges. The pressure would only increase from here. Whitmore had already pulled her into the next big project, another high-stakes acquisition. But now, Sarah could see a side of the business she hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't just about making deals and growing the company. It was about maintaining power and influence. It was about positioning themselves as the top players in a ruthless game. As Sarah sat in her office, reflecting on everything she had learned, she knew that she had changed. The quiet waitress who had once felt invisible in a world of power and wealth was no longer just an observer. She was now a key player, and her decisions carried weight. She had proven herself to Whitmore, to the board, and to herself. But the real test, she realized, was yet to come. The phone on her desk buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Whitmore's assistant, asking her to come to his office. Sarah, Whitmore said when she walked in, his tone as serious as ever. I want you to be part of the next phase. We're about to make a big move, one that could change the landscape of the entire industry. I need you to lead the charge on this. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. What's the plan? She asked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Whitmore stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I want to position Anderson Capital as the leader in sustainable energy. We've made our mark in tech, but the future is in renewable resources. We need to invest heavily in this space, and I believe you're the right person to lead this initiative. Sarah's mind raced as she processed his words. Sustainable energy was a booming market, but it was also fraught with political, economic, and environmental complexities. It was a massive undertaking, one that would require every ounce of her skill, determination, and strategy. But she wasn't afraid. She had already proven that she could face challenges head-on and come out on top. I'll do it, she said, her voice unwavering. Whitmore turned to her, a rare smile on his face. I knew you would. Over the next few months, Sarah threw herself into the project, working tirelessly to build relationships with key players in the renewable energy industry. She traveled the world, meeting with executives, government officials, and environmentalists. It wasn't just about making deals, it was about creating a vision, a strategy that would make Anderson Capital not only a major player, but a leader in the sustainable energy revolution. The work was grueling, the challenges daunting, but Sarah thrived in the intensity. Every deal she closed, every partnership she secured, brought Anderson Capital closer to its goal. And with each step forward, she could feel herself becoming more and more confident in her abilities. The company began to shift its focus, investing in solar, wind, and electric vehicle technologies. They formed partnerships with environmental organizations and began lobbying for policy changes that would support sustainable growth. It was a bold move, but it was the right one. As the years passed, Anderson Capital's position in the renewable energy sector solidified. Sarah's role within the company expanded, and she was soon appointed to the board of directors. The once quiet waitress had become one of the most powerful figures in the business world. But despite her success, Sarah never forgot where she came from. She knew that the journey she had taken was one of perseverance, not just talent. It had taken courage to stand up for what was right, to challenge the status quo, and to risk everything for a future she believed in. And now, as she stood on the balcony of Anderson Capital's headquarters, looking out at the city she had helped shape, she knew that her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The game had changed, and she was ready to play it, on her own terms. Discover the power of perseverance and integrity in this captivating journey that reflects one of the most touching stories of ambition and personal growth. Follow the protagonist's rise from a humble waitress to a powerful leader in the world of business, facing high-stakes deals, tough decisions, and the consequences of standing up for what's right. This story of resilience and grit unveils the truth behind navigating corporate politics, overcoming challenges, and finding success through unwavering determination. As the journey unfolds, the narrative dives deep into what it truly means to lead with integrity, making tough decisions that impact not only one's career but the future of a company. The story beautifully demonstrates the raw reality of taking control in the face of adversity, presenting the audience with one of the most touching stories of how integrity can shape destiny. The protagonist's struggles and triumphs offer inspiration and insight into how resilience and strength can lead to greatness. This is more than just a corporate tale. It's one of the most touching stories you'll hear about staying true to your values in a world that often prioritizes power over principles. Watch as the protagonist transforms into a force to be reckoned with in the business world, navigating complex mergers, rivalries, and impossible odds. This is a story that will leave you reflecting on your own journey and the importance of standing firm in the face of challenges. If you are looking for stories that inspire, challenge, and uplift, this touching story will certainly leave a lasting impression.